What if your life was a ghost story, haunted not by spirits, but by the choices of ancestors you never met? What if your fate, your health, and the very structure of your mind were dictated by a bargain struck centuries before your birth? This is not fiction. For generations, royal families across the globe made a chilling trade. They sacrificed genetic health for political power. They were obsessed with keeping their bloodlines pure, believing that power was a substance that ran through their veins, something to be hoarded and concentrated. To prevent it from diluting, they turned inward, marrying cousins, uncles to nieces, and in some cases even siblings. This relentless pursuit of purity came at a staggering cost, leaving a legacy of shattered minds, broken bodies, and family trees so twisted they resembled unrecognizable knots rather than branching lines. The stories that follow are not just tales of royal grandeur. They are haunting testaments to a biological truth that even emperors and pharaohs could not ignore. They are the stories of the women who paid the ultimate price for their family's ambition. Their bodies and minds the final, tragic battleground in a war against nature itself. No dynasty pursued this dangerous obsession with more catastrophic results than the Habsburgs of Europe. Their family tree is a horrifying labyrinth, a testament to centuries of systematic inbreeding that left them genetically weaker with each passing generation. Consider the case of Isabella II of Spain, a monarch whose reign was defined by the grim inheritance of her bloodline. Her own birth was the result of a marriage between an uncle and his niece. But the entanglement ran far deeper. Her grandparents on one side were also her great-grandparents on the other. At just 16, this web was pulled even tighter when she was married off to her double second cousin. The consequences were written in the lives of her children. Of the 11 she bore, only 5 survived past infancy. Yet even this heartbreaking legacy might not be the full story. Many historians believe her husband, whose own identity was the subject of unspoken truths, fathered none of those surviving children, suggesting a strained and likely unconsummated marriage. Isabella eventually lost her crown, but she could never escape the shadows of her family's genetic entrapment. Her story is dwarfed, however, by her ancestor, Maria Antonia of Austria, a woman who stood at the absolute peak of Habsburg inbreeding, surpassing even the infamous Charles II of Spain. Her ancestry wasn't a tree at all, but a dense, looping vine, what some have called a genetic circle. The inbreeding was so severe that her genetic similarity was equivalent to that of a child born to 2 full siblings. For the women born into these royal houses, life was a gilded cage where personal desire was irrelevant and their bodies were instruments of the state. They were the ultimate political pawns, their marriages arranged to forge alliances, end wars, and produce heirs, all while keeping the bloodline tightly controlled. Marie-Louise of Austria was born into one of Europe's most deeply entangled dynasties. Her parents were double first cousins, sharing both sets of grandparents, meaning she had only 4 unique great-grandparents instead of the normal 8. At just 18, she was handed over in marriage to Napoleon Bonaparte, her own father's bitter enemy, in a calculated move to secure peace and provide the French emperor with a male heir. For Marie-Louise, it was the weight of an empire placed squarely on her young shoulders. An even darker fate awaited Marie-Louise Elizabeth d'Orléans. Born into a dysfunctional royal arrangement where her father was forced to marry his own cousin, she had no choice in her future. She was married off to yet another cousin, Prince Charles of Berry. The result was a Gothic novel of sorrow. 3 children, none of whom survived childhood. Overwhelmed by the tragedy and the pressures of her station, Marie-Louise turned to alcohol at the astonishingly young age of 14. Her life a tragic tale of dynastic duty gone horribly wrong. The cost of this genetic repetition was not only measured in physical ailments and infant mortality, but also in the unraveling of minds. For many royal women, the invisible toll of inbreeding manifested as severe mental strain, a slow descent into a darkness from which there was no escape. This tragic reality is perhaps best embodied by Maria the Fern of Portugal, known by some as Maria the Pious, but more fittingly as Maria the Troubled. Born in 1734, her bloodline was already packed with dangerously close unions. Her parents were the 16th Iberian royal couple, joined by close intermarriage. Ignoring the clear warning signs and under immense pressure to maintain the purity of the family name, Maria made a decision that sealed her own fate. She married her own uncle, Pedro. The consequences were predictable and heartbreaking. Half of their children did not survive, with genetic complications likely playing a major role. As she aged, Maria's own mental state began to crumble. Overwhelmed by personal grief and perhaps the biological weight of her lineage, her condition deteriorated to the point where she was eventually deemed unfit to rule, her kingdom handed over to her son. Hers is a haunting story of a queen undone not by war or rebellion, but by an enemy within her own blood. The practice of royal inbreeding was not confined to the palaces of Europe. It was an ancient tradition, pursued with religious fervor by the divine rulers of Egypt. Deep in the Valley of the Kings, a haunting discovery tells a story of sorrow and genetic consequence. There, archaeologists uncovered two tiny, mummified fetuses, catalogued as mummies 317A and 317B. Genetic testing revealed these two infant girls, likely stillborn, were the daughters of none other than Pharaoh Tutankhamun and his queen Ankhesewamun, born around 1300 BCE. But the story holds a haunting detail. Ankhesewamun was not just Tutankhamun's wife, she was also his half-sister, sharing the same father. This was not an anomaly, but the continuation of a long-standing dynastic tradition of sibling marriage, designed to keep the divine bloodline pure. Tutankhamun himself was the product of years of such tightly confined bloodlines. By the time his own daughters were conceived, the genetic risks had reached a devastating peak. Their short, unlived lives, marked by the deformities and frailty visible even in their preserved forms, are chilling reminders that even kings who were worshipped as gods could not escape the cruel arithmetic of inbreeding. No dynasty practiced inbreeding more relentlessly or for a longer period than the Ptolemies of Egypt, and at the very end of that line stood its most famous product, Cleopatra VII Philippator. But you must forget the romanticized Hollywood version. The real Cleopatra was not a fantasy figure, but the living embodiment of a 300-year-old dynastic obsession. Though she ruled as an Egyptian pharaoh, her bloodline was purely Greek-Macedonian, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. To keep their power concentrated and their bloodline pure, the Ptolemaic dynasty relentlessly practiced brother-sister and uncle-niece marriages. Cleopatra's own parents were siblings. Her grandparents were also siblings. Her own siblings married each other before she eventually consolidated power and ruled alone. She was a living monument to this strategy, a ruler of immense intellect and political skill, but one whose biology was heavily burdened by her family's calculated ambition. In a family tree that almost never allowed outsiders in, even her name, which was borrowed from a rare Syrian princess, was one of the only hints that foreign blood had ever been permitted to enter the lineage. Cleopatra was not just a queen, she was the genetic culmination of generations of tightly woven lineage. While the most extreme forms of royal inbreeding have faded into history, their genetic echoes still linger in the family trees of modern royalty. The story of Princess Alexia of Greece, born in 1965, bridges the gap between the fading traditions of dynastic unions and their lasting biological consequences. Her parents, King Constantine II of Greece and Queen Anne-Marie of Denmark, were part of one of the last significant royal marriages between a sitting king and a royal princess from another nation. But their union was more than just a royal headline. They were closely related, not once, but twice over, as both second and third cousins. Their family trees were knotted with the kind of connections that defined older dynasties. King Constantine's great-grandparents were siblings, and one of his grandmothers was the sister of his own great-grandfather. Queen Anne-Marie's ancestry carried its own tangled legacy. Though their marriage appeared loving, their close genetic ties ensured that their children, including Alexia, were partially inbred, a situation remarkably similar to that of the famously related British royals, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. It stands as a modern royal tale rooted in a very old and very risky tradition. The devastating legacy of extreme inbreeding is not confined to the pages of royal history. It is a human story, one that continues to repeat itself in the hidden corners of the modern world, often born from isolation rather than ambition. The story of the Whittaker family from rural West Virginia is a stark and unsettling reminder of this fact. Featured in a well-known documentary, the Whittakers became a case study in the consequences of generations of intermarriage within an isolated community. Of the family members documented, Lorraine Whittaker stands out as a chilling figure, described as one of the most inbred individuals in recent memory. She is also the mother of Timmy Whittaker, who is often regarded as possibly the most genetically affected person alive today. Their story is not presented for shock value, but as a deeply human tragedy. It serves as a powerful reminder that the biological laws that undid royal dynasties do not care about crowns or castles. They are a fundamental part of the human condition, and their consequences are just as profound in a small American town as they were in the palaces of Europe. Perhaps one of the most disturbing modern cases of unchecked inbreeding comes from the Australian outback, with the story of the Colt family, a pseudonym used to protect their identities. This is not a royal tale of dynastic pride, but a dark story of isolation and systemic failure. The Colt family practiced multi-generational inbreeding for decades, living in deep isolation and creating a closed-loop community with almost no outside genetic input. When their situation finally came to the attention of authorities in the early 2000s, it triggered one of the most shocking genetic and legal revelations in the country's recent history. Investigators uncovered a disturbing and complex web of relationships that led to multiple police investigations and arrests. Kimberly Colt, born into this environment, was found to be one of the most genetically compromised individuals ever documented. Her case starkly illustrates how, in the absence of societal oversight and intervention, isolation can produce an unimaginable human cost, creating a cycle of tragedy that repeats from one generation to the next. From the majestic courts of pharaohs to the forgotten villages of Appalachia, a common thread weaves through these disparate lives: the pursuit of an ideal, whether it be power, purity, or simple isolation, that ultimately waged war on biology itself. The stories of these women, from Cleopatra II, the genetic culmination of a calculated strategy, to Kimberly Colt, a victim of a closed-loop community, are tales of tragedy, resilience, and revelation. They reveal a haunting truth that is often overlooked in the grand narratives of history. They remind us that the fates of empires and families are often shaped not just by politics, economics, or war, but by the invisible hands of biology and blood. Each of these women carried an invisible inheritance, a burden passed down through generations that manifested in their bodies, their minds, and the lives of their children. Their stories force us to confront the devastating human cost of a legacy built on a flawed foundation, proving that no wall, whether of a palace or a remote village, is strong enough to keep out the fundamental truths of nature.